Chat with Traders, episode 129, is brought to you by the award-winning online broker, TradeStation. TradeStation clients have direct access to equities, ETFs, futures, and options using one integrated trading platform, which has many professional-grade features to help you better analyze and trade markets. Learn more about TradeStation, their all-new pricing structure, and open an account at tradestation.com/traders.
This is your key to the minds of trading's elite performers, those who profit in relentless markets. Here on the Chat with Traders podcast, you'll hear about the skill sets and tactics that lead winning traders to win, so you can level up and become a better trader. Here's your host, Aaron Fifield.
What's going on, everyone? Welcome back. Thank you for listening in. Now, to introduce my guest of this episode, his name is Victor Haghani. Victor began his career at Salomon Brothers in 1984, starting out in a research role before joining their prop trading desk. In 1992, Victor left Salomon to become one of the founding partners of Long-Term Capital Management. LTCM was an incredibly successful hedge fund. Some years, while using a lot of leverage, the fund would return over 40%, until 1998, when LTCM failed in a spectacular fashion, causing the Federal Reserve to step in and organize a bailout in order to prevent the possibility of a collapse in the global financial system. Victor took a 10-year sabbatical after the dust settled, and in 2010, he founded Elm Partners, which is an active index investing fund. Victor mentioned to me that he didn't want to spend too much time discussing LTCM, but if you're interested to find out more, there is plenty of info online, and I've linked to a couple resources in the show notes, which can be found at chatwithtraders.com/129. But we did spend quite a bit of time on something I thought was very interesting, which is optimal bet sizing, and how bet sizing alone can drastically alter outcomes over a large number of bets, or trades, if you will. Much of this discussion is in reference to an experiment Victor carried out with some involvement from Edward Thorp on the patterns of how 61 participants would bet on a biased coin with real money. You can find a link to the paper, which was produced afterwards, also in the show notes. Last thing, the sound quality isn't superb, so I do apologize, but I'm sure, hopefully, your ears will quickly adapt. With that being said, here is my guest for episode 129, Victor Haghani. I read somewhere, I'm not sure how true it is, but your father was also a trader.
Yeah, my father was a trader. He wasn't a trader in the financial markets, but he was a trader in the import-export business. More that than an entrepreneur, but he was also an entrepreneur and a businessman.
Okay, that makes sense. So, did he have any influence on you getting into trading? I mean, what got you into trading? Well, no, he did not have any influence on me getting into trading. What got me into trading was John Merriweather and his team asking me to join their trading group on the floor. I had joined research at Salomon Brothers in fixed income research, and after a few years of doing research, they invited me to become a trader. I had no idea about it, or didn't know if I would be. I mean, it wasn't something that I was planning on doing. My father, though, did influence me to join Salomon Brothers. I had an offer from JP Morgan and Salomon Brothers, and I said, "Dad, which one do you think I should take?" I said, "The JP Morgan one is paying about 40% more." And he said, which one is which one is just a flatter, sort of crazier place where if you do well, you can go further? Which one is more bureaucratic? And I said, well, JP Morgan is definitely more bureaucratic. And he said, well, go for the Salomon one then. Go in there and have some fun. And he was right. Now, we won't spend too much time on this because there's some things that I definitely want to get into conversation with you about. But just give us a quick rundown on what you were doing at Salomon Brothers. And then for anyone who is unfamiliar with you, bring us up to speed on the long-term capital management situation, and then we'll get into some other topics which I think, are quite interesting. So, yeah, just give us a short rundown on your background in this industry.
Okay, sure. Yeah, so by way of background, as I mentioned, I started at Salomon in fixed income research, and then after a few years was invited to join the ARB desk, the government ARB desk or proprietary trading desk run by John Merriweather, that was kind of in the center or a prominent player in the book Liar's Poker. I was the youngest trader on the desk and learned from all these other great people and became very, very close to everybody, and it became my family. And so when a few of them, in particular John, left Salomon Brothers in 1992 to start LTCM, I had just gotten married, decided that I would like to stay with my colleagues and mentors and friends. So I left Salomon Brothers in late '92, and and then after a while I gave it some more thought and joined with John and my other partners as one of the founding partners at LTCM. And then I moved to London with my wife because I had been in London before for school and university, and I set up our London office and eventually had an excellent partner in the office, Hans Hufschmidt, and we ran all of the trading that we were doing in sort of the European sphere. And then when LTCM failed in 1998, I was one of probably a minority of partners that stayed to work for the 13 bank consortium that took over our portfolio, and we liquidated it for them over the course of a little more than a year. And then I stayed a little bit longer to help my friends get a successor hedge fund started called JWM Partners. And I forget the exact year, but I took a sabbatical, and then which turned into a 10-year sabbatical around 2001, 2002, which then eventually led to me founding Elm Partners, which I've been running for the last 5 years, which is kind of a big reverse of direction from very active investing at LTCM to what we call active index investing, which is a much more passive, long-only approach, where we charge clients 12 basis points to help them to get efficiently invested in ETFs and index funds.
I know we don't want to get bogged down in this and we want to keep things moving, but the long-term capital management situation was a very interesting event. For someone listening to this podcast who wants to find out more information about that and wants to kind of read up on that just out of, curiosity and just interest, where should they go? I know there's a lot of information online and that sort of thing. I'm not sure how much of it is accurate. I mean, is there any credible resources which you'd suggest someone turn to if they're interested in finding out more about what really happened?
Absolutely. So the problem is that the problem with the writing about LTCM is that it was such a big news item that authors and researchers felt that they needed to write about it right away. So the most popular book following LTCM is the Roger Lowenstein book called When Genius Failed. It's a good read. It's a good read, and it can't possibly be 100% accurate, but it gets a lot of the facts of the situation correct. But the problem is that it was written in such close proximity to the event that it really doesn't have the perspective where there's so much more valuable insights to be drawn that you would get in looking back at this, after 15 years or so, and particularly after the financial crisis of '08. So nobody is really going to write a book about LTCM, that's a fresh look at it, say in 2010, looking back at that, that's from so long ago. So unfortunately, that doesn't really exist. So the Lowenstein book, there's another book by a gentleman named, I just had his name in my mind, Dunbar. Yeah, Nick Dunbar. That was another book written at the time that came out just before Roger's book. So those are okay, in terms of laying out what happened at the time. Those are decent. And Roger Lowenstein's they're both good writers, so they're well-written books. Sort of the most, I would say, to really get a much better idea of the whole thing, though, I would suggest buying the Harvard Business Study Harvard Business School case study by Andre Perold, Perold. So Harvard Business School did a case study on LTCM, and so they collected a lot of facts, and it's very concise. That's where I would really go to try to get more directly at the facts and save yourself a few hundred pages of reading. So the Harvard Business School case study, I think those are really the best resources for trying to take a look at what happened. But, as I say, the best thing would be for somebody to write a book now reflecting on it, because I think that I think that the lessons to be learned from it are different than they felt in the aftermath.
Okay, excellent. And I mean, I'm sure as we get talking, you'll probably draw on some of those lessons as we go. So I appreciate you sharing those few resources.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, we're all a product of our experiences. So yeah, the LTCM was probably one of the biggest experiences. Certainly by far was the biggest business experience of my life.
Now, Victor, you first came onto my radar. Obviously I was familiar with the whole LTCM thing, but you first came onto my radar recently when you produced a paper. Now, that paper was based on an experiment about a biased coin flip. I'm not going to try and explain what the paper was about. I'm going to leave that up to you. But I'd really like to talk about this. I thought it was quite an interesting experiment. So just to begin things, what was the premise or idea of the experiment?
Well, we wanted to investigate how quantitative, financially trained people would approach wagering on a biased coin with real money. So we set up an experiment where we went out and ultimately tested 61 subjects, where we gave them $21. We gave them a computer program that had a biased coin that you could flip by pressing a button. We told them that the coin was biased 60% to land on heads, and it was. And we told them that however much money they had at the end of 30 minutes, we would pay them that money out, subject to a cap, and the cap they would find out about if they got close to it. So flip away for a half an hour. And within a half an hour, some people who flipped quickly were able to flip 300 times, and you could flip any amount of money that you had in your bank account. You could wager on the flip of the coin down to a 1 cent increment. So that was it. That was the experiment.
Okay, and how much would the participants make if it landed on? I presume it was probably heads that paid out the 60%, and then tails was the losing side. How much would they win or lose for each, depending on which side it landed?
No, so the coin was biased. So the coin would land on heads 60% of the time, but the payout you would win or lose whatever you bet. So if you started off and you bet $4 if you bet $4 on heads and it came up heads, you would win $4. If it came up tails, you would lose $4. You could also bet on tails. You might say, why would somebody do that? But people bet a lot on tails. We told them it was 60% heads, and it was, but still people sometimes bet on tails. So you could bet on either side that you want. That was one of the things we were curious about. And the payout was a 1-to-1 payout, but you had a 60% chance of the coin landing on heads.
Okay, I get it. So, I mean, that seems quite bizarre. Why did people bet on tails? I mean, especially if there was a much greater probability of it landing on heads. Why did people pick tails?
Well, we conducted some interviews afterwards, and the two biggest reasons that we found were, one was that, and this is a well-documented bias that people have, is that they kind of feel that things that are random aren't random, that there's predictability in random things, right? So people after a string of heads, like if there were 4 heads in a row, they would be more likely to bet on tails. They couldn't resist. It was like, wait, there were 4 heads in a row. It's going to be tails next. And there's a whole, there's papers and papers written on every one of these biases in the literature. So that's been documented before. The other one, which was really interesting, which I got from my mom. So my mom wasn't in our sample, but I had her do the experiment, but I didn't count her in there. And I said, Mom, you bet on tails sometimes. Why'd you do that? And she said to me, I know that I should never bet on tails. I understand that never should bet on tails. It's 60% heads. But, it was just so boring and I couldn't help myself. So I think that this boredom is really important. It's a really important aspect of what goes on. That just sitting there and just betting as fast as you can on heads is boring. And that's a bit of a problem for some of us.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. So, once you conducted this experiment, what sort of results did you see? Like, how did the group perform?
Well, people did. Especially given that these were, math students, finance students, MBA students, venture capital investors, and investment managers. That's kind of described all of the backgrounds of the people. About a third of the people went bust. A third of the people went bust, flipping a biased coin that's in their favor. About a third of the people, or a little bit less than that, reached the maximum, the payout, which was $250. So a bunch of these, in a lot of cases, these kids, it's like going into one of the London universities, and a bunch of these guys are around, and I'm paying them all out, like $250, for flipping a coin for half an hour. But so it was really interesting. So about 20% of the people hit the cap of $250 or 10x. 30% of the people went bust. The other 50% of the people averaged about $80. Everybody altogether averaged about $90. And this is really suboptimal because a very simple kind of rule, such as I will just bet 15% of my stake on every flip and bet heads, would give you upwards of a 95% chance of hitting that $250 cap. So very suboptimal behavior. What was it, like just under half of the people bet on tails more than 5 times. That was kind of crazy that there was so much tails betting. And we said, as I say, more than 5 times. So I think, I might have bet on tails once just to see what would happen. Like if I bet on tails, would it say, you've just won, you've won, that you stepped out of the box and bet on tails and now you're a winner or something. I might have bet on tails once for $1, but, but like 40-50% of the people bet on tails more than 5 times. So really interesting. I love this coin flipping stuff. It's great.
Yeah. So you said, I think if I heard you correctly, about a third of people went bust. They went bankrupt. They lost all their money. What were the reasons that led participants to go bust? Like, did they just bet everything on one flip? Was it...
Well, ultimately, they had to do that, right? The only way you can go bust, and there's 2 ways to go bust, really. Either you sort of bet, either you make a voluntary choice to bet everything, or you get down to having 1 cent left, and then you can't bet anything less than 1 cent, and so you have to bet the 1 cent, and if you lose, you're bust. But basically, everybody just voluntarily sort of bet their whole stake at some point, and they were out. And normally what would happen is they bet their whole stake just after they had lost betting more than they should have been betting. So it was kind of like, you had, $15 in your bank account, and then for some reason, you bet $7. Maybe you were following a doubling down strategy. So you bet $7 on heads, and now you had $8 left. And you're like, oh gosh, I got to get back up there. So you bet. So maybe, you would bet a small amount for a while. Then, you're not really going anywhere. So then you'd say, okay, I've got $9. I'm going to bet $4. Now you've gotten to $5. Then you bet $2.50. You lose that. You're down at $2.50. And then, you're like, how am I going to get out of here? And you just start betting pretty heavily as a fraction of the $2.50. And, all of a sudden you're at 50 cents and you're like, all right, the only way I'm going to get out of here is to just bet my 50 cents and get 5 heads in a row or something, which is, I don't know. We should have interviewed the people who went bankrupt more, but they didn't really want to talk about it much. They were kind of out of there pretty quickly.
I can understand.
As soon as, we did have a rule. We said, you cannot leave this room until the half an hour is over. So we were afraid that sometimes, you would get this thing where somebody would say, geez, I got $2 in my bank. I just want to go out and make a phone call. I want to get out of here and have a coffee. So I'm just going to bet this thing and leave. So we said, no, you got to, so we made everybody sit in the room. So even if you went bust, you had to just sit there until the half an hour was over.
Now, you made an interesting comment before. You said something like, if participants had have just bet 15% of their bankroll on each bet, they would have had a 95% chance of hitting the money cap or the payout, the max payout, which was, I think, $250. So where does that 15% come from? I guess we're now kind of getting into optimal bet sizing, but yeah, how did you arrive at that 15%?
Well, first of all, as I was saying, there's kind of a whole range that works pretty well in this particular problem. Like if you were betting anything from like 8 or 9% up to about 20%, you'd have a really, really high chance of hitting that cap. Kind of the magic number, in a way, there's sort of this magic number which is known as the Kelly number, the Kelly criterion, which maximizes your rate of growth of wealth, named after John Kelly, and lots of books and everything written about that. That fraction would actually be 20%. But given that this game has a cap, that probably you would want to bet less than that Kelly number. The optimal solution to this game is really complicated, but these approximations or heuristics are fine. I mean, you just have to have the insight that you want to bet some. You want to be betting some fraction of your bank on the bets. And you also, if you know that there's a cap, you want to have some idea, you want to have some prior of what the cap could conceivably be. I think any, common sense would tell these guys that I'm not going to walk in and do this experiment and pay somebody $1 million if they make $1 million, right? So, whether it's $250 or $50 or $1,000, these guys should know that, that's kind of going to be the range of this cap, that it just wouldn't be credible that I would go in there and be paying these guys, if they got on a roll, that I would pay them $100,000, right?
Yeah, and when I read the paper, I think it stated in the paper that if someone had used optimal bet sizing with these sort of odds, the payout after flipping a coin for 30 minutes could have been, I think it was well over $1 million. It might have been way over. How much was it?
Yeah, so exactly. So if this game had been uncapped, so one thing that people had no appreciation of is just how incredibly valuable this game would be uncapped. So if this game were uncapped, then the expected value, and this is going to be, I think this is kind of an interesting thing to dwell on a little bit more. The expected value of the game would be about $3 million. In other words, if you flip the coin 300 times, and every time you bet 20% on it, that would be like a 4% return on every flip, and a 4% return over 300 events, is like over 100,000. And so that's where you get to the $3 million from the 25 starting point. So that's the expected value, which I think, none of the participants really, or virtually none of the participants appreciated. But then it's kind of interesting because you get into this question of, so how much would you pay? Let's say that somehow, for some reason, somebody offered you this game uncapped, as unlikely as that would be. But somebody, for some reason, you got to play this game uncapped, just as a thought experiment. What would you pay to play the game, right? You would say, well, it's worth $3 million. Should I pay $1 million to play the game if it's got an expected value of $3 million? Well, the answer is no. I mean, that the way to figure out how much you should be willing to pay to play the game is that you need to bring in a function of your own risk aversion. You need to bring in a utility function. And this is so interesting. It goes all the way back to Daniel Bernoulli and all this work that was done, 400 or 500 years ago. The St. Petersburg paradox is about a game. It's about a game of chance similar to this one that has an expected value equal to infinity, but people are only willing to pay like $10 to play it, because the expected utility of the game has a value equivalent to $10. Now, I know that I'm going really fast here, et cetera, and it's sort of, there's a bunch of short pieces on our website that talk more about this, but probably people also have learned this at, in finance or economics classes if they've taken those. But it's so interesting because that difference between the expected value and the dollar value equivalent of the expected utility is so huge. So in this game, the expected value uncapped would be $3 million, but you could imagine somebody who's, sort of normally risk averse, being willing to only pay $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 to play the game, depending on their risk aversion. And so, and the way to think about that is where the real value of this game is coming from is when you're getting a lot more, it's very skewed. If you get a lot more heads than the expected number of heads, it becomes a bonanza. So, and I've got a little bit more to say on that, but let me stop there so you could give me a little more direction. But I've got something that I want to explain on that more as well.
Feel free to do so. I mean, I was going to ask about how this ties into financial markets, so I think that might take us on another tangent. If you want to finish off any further comments you have, feel free to do so. Okay,
so what I'd like to say is that one of the really key things that this research makes us think about is investment sizing, is trade sizing, and is risk management, all the same thing. And what's so interesting here to me is, let's think about the 60-40 coin for a second again, right? So I said, well, the Kelly optimal bet is 20%, right? Well, what's the strategy that gives you the highest expected value of the game, right? Because I said Kelly gives you the highest expected growth rate. I said the game is only worth in expected utility terms, $10,000 to $40,000, maybe more depending. But what's the optimal strategy to follow if you were not risk averse at all, you had no risk aversion, and you were just trying to sort of get the highest expected value from the game? The answer is that you bet 100% of your money on every flip, and you do that for 300 flips. Now, I think that is just a moment's reflection tells you that is a ridiculous strategy. You have almost 100% chance of winding up with no money left over because you're going to lose. The chances that you don't lose money on 300, that you don't come up tails in 300 flips is pretty close to zero. It's like one of those crazy small numbers. But that's the highest expected value for the game, right? Because, well, that's what it is. Now, what if we said, instead of betting this sort of Kelly optimal fraction, if I said to you, well, look, this is a great game. Forget about Kelly. Let's just bet 50% of our bank on each flip. Well, if you do that, the expected value of the game is much, much higher than it is by betting 20% because you're betting more on a favorable flip, okay? But what's the problem with that? Well, the problem with that is that you can see that. So first of all, in terms of expected gain, right, I said to you that if you're betting 20%, your expected gain for each flip is 4%, right? 60% of winning $1, minus, 60% of winning 20 cents because let's say that you have $1 of wealth and you're betting 20 cents. That's the 20%. So it's 60% of 20% minus 40% of the 20%, and that is 4%. So you make 4% expected return on each flip. But if you're betting 50% of your wealth on each flip, then the expected gain per flip is actually 10% because you have a 60% chance of making 50 cents and a 40% chance of losing 50 cents, and that adds up to a 10% return. So that means that after 10 flips, your expected gain is to be at a multiple of 2.6 times your starting point, or after 100 flips, you've grown your wealth expectation to 14,000. But think about this for a second. Let's say you're taking 10 flips like that, and things turn out exactly as you expect, which would be, 6 heads and 4 tails, right? Well, let's think about first, let's think about that as being 4 heads, 4 tails, and then 2 more heads. So what does that look like, right? Well, when you make 50% of your money, that's great. Your dollar grew into $1.50. But then when you lose on the next coin, you've lost 50%, you're down at 75 cents. So do that up and down 4 times, right? And you're down to having about 30 cents left over. Geez, that's terrible. But then you win twice in a row because we said 6 heads and 4 tails. But the result of winning twice in a row after that is you've just grown back up to 0.7. So in the case where you go up 6 and down 4 in any order, if you get 6 heads and 4 tails and you're betting 50% of your wealth, you're going to wind up losing 30% of your wealth. Isn't that crazy, right? That's the sort of downward drift in the median value. And so if you do that a lot, if you do that 100 times, you're going to wind up with like zero left over, 0.03 or something like that. And what's more is that if you think about it in sort of any kind of normal utility sense, you'll see that betting 50% is a negative expected utility investment to make. And so therefore we shouldn't do it. It's a bad thing. You would be better off. So if somebody came to you and said, here's a 60-40 coin, the only thing is you have to bet 50% of your wealth on it, what would you do? Any normal person should say, hey, I'll pass. Thank you very much, and sort of move on. So, I think this whole bet sizing thing is so important. It seems so sort of simple, and it seems like it's secondary to the idea of identifying a good investment. We do need to identify good positive return investments. That's critical. But we also then need to decide how big to be in them. And I think that, one of the great lessons from LTCM is about trade sizing. If we had had a third of the positions that we had, things would have been different. So I'll stop there.
Yeah, I think if anyone's getting lost in this, which is quite easy to do, check out the paper. I'm going to link to the paper in the show notes. So it'll be at chatwithtraders.com. Might make some of this a lot clearer. If you are getting lost, if you're following along, that's even better. But I'll link to the paper in the show notes. This episode of Chat with Traders is supported by TradeStation. When it comes to deciding on a broker, there's probably 1,000 different options you could choose from. But it's fair to say, very few online brokers offer the services, the technology, and the tools all in one like TradeStation do. Better yet, TradeStation have rolled out an all-new simplified pricing structure to help you preserve your trading capital. $5 stock trades or 1 cent per share, no software fees, free real-time data, free use of TradeStation's premium scanning tool, radar screen, and a few extras too. You're going to save yourself a lot of grief if you can get set up with the right broker. So find out for yourself, are TradeStation a good match for you? Visit tradestation.com/traders to find out now and open an account to get started. Again, the link to visit is tradestation.com/traders. And a thank you to FreshBooks for also being a sponsor on this episode. FreshBooks is for the small business owner who struggles with tax stuff and, put bluntly, just hates dealing with it. But there's no point burying your head in the sand. Instead, bring FreshBooks into your world. FreshBooks is ridiculously easy to use cloud accounting software that will transform the way you handle your taxes. Not to mention, it's also a huge time saver. FreshBooks keeps all your cash flow details in one place so you know exactly what invoices you sent, who's paid you, and what your income is. So, start a free 30-day trial and stay completely zen come tax time. Go to freshbooks.com/traders and use the code word traders in the How Do You Hear About Us section. Again, that's freshbooks.com/traders and use the code traders in the How Do You Hear About Us section. Now, this is all very interesting, but I guess the real question is, what can we learn from this as traders? Like, where can we get a biased coin in financial markets?
Well, the clearest place to get, in my opinion, the clearest place to get a biased coin in the markets is beta. To me, that's the clearest place to get it. Is that the stock market, not only that there's both reason to believe that the stock market will give us a return above the risk-free rate, and also we can verify that on an ex-ante basis by looking at corporate earnings, corporate dividends, and making some relatively straightforward assumptions about the future outcomes. So without looking back at the past at all, I think that we can look at equities and convince ourselves that equities should and do have a positive expected return above the risk-free rate or above inflation. Unfortunately, it's a pretty bad Sharpe ratio compared to what we really want, right? So, I think that it's a bit like a 60-40 coin toss, but with a lot more hair on it than the coin has. So that's one place that we can get, other related sources of beta, similar sources of beta out there. We can also get that sort of positive biased coin from those. So, not only is our global equities likely to have a risk premium going forward, but also, real estate and other related things. But once you move away from that, Aaron, it gets really tough. But there's lots of, there's relative value. There's a lot of relative misvaluation in the world out there. So you can put on, I don't really follow it anymore, but you can put on trades, buying in the fixed income world and different places and find these good relative value trades. The problem is that, I think that the distributions of those trades are really difficult in the sense that they tend to have these big negative fat tails on the downside.
Yeah. I guess one of the big takeaways from this experiment is just showing how position sizing can have such a huge effect on your outcome, after however many flips or however many trades, after doing something many times over. I know one of the people who helped you with this experiment was Edward Thorp. What sort of comments did he have, and what was his input on this experiment?
Well, I would say that his involvement in it was first inspiration. That he that everything he's done, everything he's communicated to people, sort of inspired us in this direction. And then after we had done the experiment and after we had written it up, we sent it to him to get his comments, and he had helpful comments for us. And he had even better than that. He was very encouraging, and he really liked it. And he's talked about it to some of his followers as well. So that's his involvement in it.
I listened to a talk you gave, I think it was at the TransferWise office, and it must have only been the other week. I came across it on YouTube, and I noticed it had only been online for a few days. One of the things you said during that talk I found rather interesting, especially given that you have worked with Ed Thorp. You said, I don't know if you can beat the market, and I think this kind of ties into what we're talking about. What we've talked about prior to this as well. Would you mind just expanding on that comment?
Okay.
Tough question.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember what I said, and at the same time asking myself what I believe in this, because I'm not sure that that's exactly what I said and how it came out. But I believe that certain people can beat the market. I definitely believe that certain people can beat the market. I'm very skeptical that investors can figure out who those people are in a positive, expected manner. So there are brilliant, rare people out there, relatively rare people out there who can beat the market. As somebody who I don't think that I can do it, or I don't want to try to do it, I don't think I can identify those guys in a reasonable time to be able to allocate them money and earn an improved return as compared to a relatively passive form of investing. I think that's what I said to them. And I was talking to them about the paucity of or the lack of power of historical data to help us identify these things. I think that historical data, just as I know it's very hackneyed when this saying of or this boilerplate phrase of past returns are not indicative of future performance. But when you do the numbers, when you think about the numbers from a statistical point of view, you'll conclude that that past performance cannot really be indicative of future returns with the amount of data that we have on different things. And actually, I've just got a paper that we're going to post in the next couple of days that's kind of on this topic. And again, it's using a coin. It's using the lens of coin flipping to explain that. To give you a quick preview of one of the opening of the paper asks this question. It says, imagine that you have two coins, there are two coins presented to you, and you're told one of them is a 60-40 coin, and the other one is a 50-50 coin. And you're asked, how many times do you require? You're going to request a certain number of times to see the coins flipped in parallel and count up heads and tails. How many times do you request to see them flipped so that you would have a 95% confidence in choosing the right coin or identifying the biased from the unbiased coin? People's intuition, all right, if people sit down and calculate it, they come to the right answer. But people's intuition is to give a relatively low number, like 20 or 30 flips, that in 20 or 30 flips you would get there. But the answer is 143. And what that kind of means is that it takes 143 years to differentiate an investment manager that's giving you a 0 Sharpe ratio versus one that's giving you a Sharpe ratio of 0.2. And slicing the data up into weekly data or monthly data doesn't help at all. So anyway, that's about half the paper I just gave you right there. So, but hopefully you'll enjoy the other half of it when you get to it.
Yeah. And where will that be available when it comes out?
It'll be on our website, and by the way, people can sign up to get our thought pieces as we put them out there. Just go to the website and you can sign up, and then we'll send you our blog pieces. But that'll be on our blog and also on the Elm Labs website, and hopefully in the next couple of days. We're trying to make it interactive. So we want to make it where you go there, we ask you the question, you put in your answer, then we talk about it, we ask you another question, and then talk about it some more. So we think that's kind of fun.
Okay, good one. Very cool. Are there any parting words of wisdom you'd like to leave with us? Anyone who's listening to this, Victor, anything you'd like to add to take us out?
No, I've really enjoyed this. I think that I don't really have very much on the wisdom front, so I hope you'll have me back sometime. I really enjoyed chatting with you and sharing thoughts and experiences.
I've thoroughly enjoyed this, Victor. I appreciate you coming on. So if anyone wants to find out more about you, elmfunds.com. And are you on Twitter?
No, I guess I should. I'm hoping to do that soon. I haven't figured out Twitter yet. Sorry, I'm a little bit slow. But I did do LinkedIn, so I've got Twitter ahead of me, and also Facebook is in my future, I think, or in the future of our company. But at the moment, LinkedIn, but hopefully soon on Twitter.
Okay. Very good. Well, again, Victor, thank you for coming on the podcast. I've enjoyed it, man. Again, thank you.
You've reached the end of this episode of Chat with Traders, but rest assured there are more episodes loaded with real market insight and zero hype on the way soon. So to stay updated with each great new release, subscribe to the podcast in iTunes, and we'd love it if you'd leave a rating and review. We'll catch you next time on Chat with Traders.